At 8:15 a.m. on September 11, 2001, I sat in my class at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, early as usual. The overachiever gene inherited from my dad, Joe Ditmar. I had no idea what I would face that day, and how my life would change, especially being so far away from New York. My father worked in downtown Chicago at the time. After I was dismissed from my class because the first plane had hit the World Trade Center, I immediately made the connection that the Sears Tower could be next, a mere 10 blocks from my dad's building. By that time, however, it was already impossible to get a hold of people via telephone, and I suddenly felt alone at school without a real knowledge of my family's safety. A few hours later, I was finally able to get a hold of my grandmother in a suburb of Chicago. I'll never forget, she nonchalantly mentioned, "Isn't that weird that your dad is in New York City today?" I couldn't believe my grandmother's aloof statements, completely unaware of the gravity of the situation in New York City. At that moment, I truly did not know where to go and what to do. I had already made the decision not to watch any coverage of the event, and chose instead to go to the campus chapel to be alone with my thoughts and fears. Little did I know that while I was sitting in the chapel, trying to wrap my head around the severity of this trauma, my father was running down 105 flights of stairs in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Although my father lived and worked in Chicago, he had taken a short trip to New York for a meeting of insurance executives on the day that the World Trade Center was attacked. When the North Tower was hit, he later explained that his meeting continued for a short time before they actually evacuated the second tower. Many of his colleagues chose to take the elevator from the 105th floor, and for some reason, something in his heart told him to continue on the emergency stairwell instead. Those in the elevators would have no idea that the South Tower would be hit at the 82nd floor, taking all of their lives. As much as I tried to contemplate what people were thinking in those collapsing structures, I still didn't see my father there, leaving everything behind and literally running for his life. The images that he saw on the stairwell can only be somewhat understood and conveyed by my own interpretation. But one of the many things he described to me was all the piles of briefcases, laptops, and high heels throughout the stairwells. All the essentials of modern society were completely useless in this traumatic event. Eventually, as he and a few colleagues descended into an unknown chaos, reality hit them with a shock when they finally were able to see through an occasional window. Many people were simply awestruck, including my father, at the incessant flames slowly surrounding them. Luckily, he was able to continue on his journey towards the bottom of the building, focusing not on the mental images he had just seen, but rather the images of my mother, my sisters, myself, my brother, and my nephew. The only thing to deter his focus for survival was his experiences watching brave men and women climbing up the stairs of the South Tower while he raced down. Their eyes were wide and fearless, recognizing the gravity of the task ahead of them and at the same time willing to do whatever it took to do their job and put their own lives aside. The sounds of crumbling steel and explosions were harmonized with scared individuals singing songs of hope and prayer, all helping to give everyone the energy needed to survive. I sat on campus for most of the morning, avoiding any contact with the television. I look back now and I wonder if I inherently knew that I was more connected to the attacks than my classmates. After checking in with friends on campus, I went home to my apartment alone, still completely overwhelmed with fear that I had not heard from anyone in my family since my grandmother's call. I parked my car at 332 in front of my apartment, and as I turned off the engine, my phone rang. I looked down at the screen and saw the name Daddy flashing in front of me, and I completely broke down. He had called me from a complete stranger's home in Manhattan after walking the streets of New York. It was then that I found out that my father was 5 blocks from the World Trade Center when the South Tower fell. He told me he was safe, that he was scared, but okay, and that he would be trying to get to his mother's house in Philadelphia sometime soon. Even then, I didn't truly understand all my father had experienced that morning. For the next few years, I understood that I was a part of this historical event, but I had still maintained my avoidance of the details, including television coverage, newspaper articles, and discussion of any personal experiences my father had. Like many people, both directly and indirectly affected by the attacks on September 11th, I simply wanted to get past it. In the summer of 2005, I had already achieved my bachelor's degree and was on my way to Tempe, Arizona to start my master's program at ASU. It was there that I finally was able to find a coping mechanism from my experience on September 11th. One of the many traits my father passed on to myself and my siblings was a passion for academics. And it was only natural that I first attempt to truly deal with almost losing my father in an academic realm. It wasn't until the 5-year anniversary of September 11th that I watched the television coverage from that day. By that time, I had begun my thesis research on visual narratives and graphic novels, specifically dealing with trauma and 9/11. I inundated myself with the images compiled throughout the years following the attacks and found a way for me to complete innovative and important research while also connecting myself to the events in a way I had avoided for 5 years. I talked to my father about the visual memories ingrained in his mind from that day and how they served as personal coping mechanisms for him. By creating an academic scope for my understanding, I was then able to face the idea that I could have lost my father on September 11th. And at that time, I was finally able to truly celebrate the personal strength and determination in his survival. I'm here today as a mere representative for my own personal hero. Although Joe Ditmar travels the country speaking to groups just like yourselves, reminding them to never forget those who were lost on September 11th, I want to take a moment to also remember the lives that were saved by the bravery of men and women in uniform, as well as their own personal drive for survival. We're here today, thousands of miles from the World Trade Center complex, but I'm here to show that we're all connected to this event. This is the first truly traumatic event for my own generation, and in a media-centered society, this was the first time that an attack could be seen live as it occurred. As a nation, we suffered a huge loss that day, not only of lives, but a sense of security in the United States. Whether one was in Columbus, Philadelphia, or Phoenix, his life was compromised on September 11, 2001. And only the strength of the national community could help keep the fragile balance of life in check. Since then, we've all gone back to our day-to-day lives as we were instructed to by our national leaders. However, today, let us take a moment to not only reflect on those lost, but of those that survived the events of September 11th, creating a model of perseverance and determination for the entire nation. Today, I would like to take a moment, as my father would have wanted if he were here, to keep the voices of 3,000 lost that day talking, to keep their spirits soaring, and to never, never let it be felt that their lives, so shamelessly and brutally taken, should have been lost in vain. We are all a part of this day, and we will never forget.
you, Kristen. We share in your celebration and relief of your father's survival, and we appreciate your words of wisdom. Thank you very much.